you to do Biden. Now we done lost a damn vote. We done lost a vote. That's gonna go to Trump. God damn.
I mean, when you mention black people, you mentioning black women. So don't count yourself out.
No, that's not true.
All right, maybe we can do a Christmas ramble. I think I can get through this. Because I'll start it off and I'm going to cuss out Green Gorilla because he suggested Heidegger, being in time. And so I'm listening to this, I think it's a lecture. I'm not quite sure exactly what it was. And as complex philosophy is, they use a lot of terms and words. And what in my mind, if I don't know the exact terms of the words that they're using, I know when you're trying to come up with or describe a concept, you're going to use a lot of words and you're going to use a lot of synonyms to actually paint a picture about the esoteric concept that you're talking about. And what my mind does is looking for a term as a hook. One of those terms are going to spit, or several of those terms are going to spit, are going to connect together and give me a hook, or at least a hook into what they're trying to describe. Which is why when I do philosophy in my simple way, because I can't even shine the shoes of a mind like Green Gorilla. He's so steeped in it that I'm an amateur compared to him. Because I hear him talking about different terms and different epochs of philosophy, and how he bridges the gaps between the two, between all of them, not just the two, but all of them, and compares them and contrasts them. For a mind like his, it's to sit at the feet and actually listen. Whether you even understand it or not, just listen. That is what learning's about. That's what I live for. But I just want to cuss him out. I'm listening to Heidegger, man. And so it gets you in the mode. That's one thing about philosophy and stuff like that. It gets you in the mode about thinking about who you are in the existence, or the apparent existence that you live in, that you exist in, because we don't know exactly what this is. Like Heidegger says, we're thrown into it. They were going through thrownness, and I trying to figure, without reading, you can't actually get exactly what they're saying, because in English, how a word is spelled rather than what is pronounced is more important. So when I actually figured out what they're trying to say, which is thrownness, which is that basically you emerge into a being, not out of your own conscious will. You're just like thrown into a situation, and you have to make sense of it, which is most of what we call life. You emerge, or you're born into, or you're thrown into an environment that you have to make sense of, you have to navigate. But as anybody's ever listened to any of my panels or hangouts or whatever we want to call them now, or streams, we have what we call the BGS drift. It never stays on topic. So I got to thinking about existence, or even being, as an idea of the one, because the idea, or the imagining of the one, the projection. Because all imagining is projecting onto existence, that something that doesn't exist, and that's where most of our inventions come out of, which is an idea or an imagination or a projection out of the ether, out of your mind, and form it into an object, a concrete object. That's a lot of the way I actually deal with philosophy, or esotericism, as I call it, is taking it out of the ether and trying to make it concrete, which is why when I try to do it, or when I do it, I take the words, or take the ideas, or take the concepts, and try to form it into a picture. And I was noticing that they were struggling with describing the concepts. And there's always a saying, a picture's worth 1,000 words, which is why I use other things like physics or religion, or even popular media, to actually show a representation of what I'm talking about. That's why I love science, or I love physics, because at the end of the day, science or STEM is trying to give you bring the esoteric into concrete. All those mathematical equations you put on a board, and I remember my linear algebra teacher. We're in a classroom that has 4 large chalkboards, and we're doing one problem, and he filled 4 large chalkboards twice. And at the very end of the class, he's still trying to figure out or trying to grasp the last portion of the problem, to the point where we're sitting there taking notes, and he forgot all about us because he's so immersed into the problem, because he's trying to turn that problem into a concrete idea, a concrete concept. He's trying to bring that thing out of the ether into the world. And I think what we do, what's happening in this modern electronic age, is that we're doing the opposite. I think we're trying to make the concrete into some kind of esoteric non-being, trying to turn the concrete into words instead of the other way around. And I think sometimes we worry too much about ideas and concepts and philosophies instead of trying to make those ideas, concepts, and philosophies into concrete things, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if you can't apply it. If you can't apply it, it doesn't matter. Whether it's in the male-female relation, which is submission, which is compliance, or whatever other terms we actually throw around, it doesn't mean anything unless we can actually turn it into something that's concrete. And I was thinking, even when we talk about the ideas or the philosophies, competing philosophies in politics that we're dealing with right now, left versus right, conservative versus liberal, capitalism versus socialism. Those are ideas and concepts supposedly projected down into being, into a working system that works for people. Now we're doing the opposite. We're taking a working system that's concrete and projecting it back up into the realm of ideas and concept, and it's getting all muddled. At the end of the day, any of those ideas, concepts, and creations are supposed to be concrete, and they're supposed to work. If they don't work, they're supposed to be cast aside. And we're getting too caught up in arguing about the concept, arguing about the idea. And sometimes we argue about concept and ideas that we know don't work. It don't work. Find another idea, or at least change the idea and the concept to where it's a working model. In science, you have to have a working model. In science, you have to do experimentation. And Nicole talks about that all the time with her mice. She can have a great concept. She can have a great idea. And on paper, it can work beautifully. You can flow charts and diagrams and actions and reactions. But at the end of the day, she's got to put that concept into a mouse and have it a concrete outcome. Otherwise, the idea doesn't mean anything. Which is why I think that more people should take STEM, or more people should get into a trade, because we're getting too ethereal. Take somebody like Artisan. If he's working on he has to solve a problem with a building, a pipe, a wall, a door. Okay, he has to turn something ethereal into a working concrete object. And it doesn't matter how beautifully it comes off in his mind or his head. It has to be brought into the real world as a working system. And I think in the manosphere, we're way too caught up on concepts and philosophies and ideas that go circular and never go anywhere, right? And it doesn't have to mean that it has to be political. It doesn't mean that it has to be broad. What it has to have is a working model. You applying it. And then once you apply it, does it scale to a point where most of the general public or the general audience can use it? Have you broken it down to the point where the general audience can use it? And sometimes have you broken it down to the point where it's idiot-proof? Anybody can use it. That is the most powerful idea. Like most cars are pretty much idiot-proof. Most smartphones are pretty much idiot-proof. Turn on a button, you move your fingers around, and it does something. It connects by itself. It'll find its own cell or Wi-Fi. It'll find it without you even lifting a finger. Most of the time, those are the most successful systems. Those are the most powerful ideas that actually get brought into the world and turned into something. Just thinking about politics and what we're going through now. And people arguing over concepts and ideas and philosophies instead of looking at what those ideas and philosophies and concepts actually do and what they're meant for. At the end of the day, where do these ideas go and what do they do in the real world? And most people don't look at it because they're looking at political theater and they're getting caught up with the emotion. They're getting mesmerized by the priest. We don't think of the politicians as priests, but they are. They're spreading beliefs. They're spreading indoctrination on both sides until you dig into details and you find out what they're actually doing, who they're actually protecting, and why they are doing certain things. For example, most places in the world, even the poorest places in the world, homelessness does not exist. You don't see people living on the street. You know, I was in one of the poorest countries in the Americas, Guatemala. There are no people on the street. I used to walk every day and walk amongst the neighborhoods. There are no people on the street, none. Poor people that only make a couple of dollars a day. In Africa, it's in Ghana, it's not a rich country, but you have lots and lots of poor people. There are no people on the street. Now, what they don't have is a lot of food. I mean, eating is a primary concern because they don't have as many calories as we have. But there are no people on the street. Even if it's a shack, there are no people on the street. Why do you not see homelessness until you get to the empire? There are probably more homeless people in the empire, in the United States, than probably in the world. Take a place like China with the 1.5 billion people. They have more homes. They have more apartments and homes and dwellings for people to live in than they have people sometimes. Korea, there's no homelessness in Korea. In Japan, there's no homelessness. In Singapore, people are not homeless. There's no people living on the street. There's no people sleeping on the street. To them, that's a sin against the society for people not to have a place. Even if it's a shack, even if it's a tin roof, it's a sin for somebody not to have a place. In the richest country in the world with the most resources, with the most money, the most control, the most powerful, I would dare say the most powerful empire that's ever been on the face of the earth, with wealth and riches coming to it from every shore. Why do we have so many homeless people? Why, even now that we're looking at a homeless crisis, why do we not ask that a government, a ruler, cannot supply the basics for its members? We're citizens. We're members of a society. And an advanced society like this should be able to supply every citizen with the basics: food, clothing, shelter. I don't care if it's a goddamn cave. There shouldn't be nobody out there in those elements. And then when people try to make makeshift tents to get out of the elements, what do we want to do? We want to tear down their dwellings. So they have to sleep on a bare sidewalk in the elements. It doesn't make sense. What is a society for? Why are we members of a society? Why do we come together as a collective? And don't give me the shit about an individual. We are not individuals. We are a collective. I hear this people that are anti-collectivists. Don't give me that shit. A collective of people, whether it's a clan, whether it's a tribe, whether it's a kingdom, whether it's a country, whether it's an empire or a civilization that we live in. It's a collective. It's a collective of people. Why are we members of a society and not demand that every citizen gets the basics? Doesn't have to earn it. No, you should. That is a birthright of a member of a society. Birthright. That should be the minimum. That doesn't mean that you have to eat 3,500 calories or 4,000 calories a day. They eat grandiose meals. That's not what I mean. The basics. The basics of food, clothing, and shelter. The average American eats more calories than they can actually use as far as their bodies are concerned. Have homeless people with smartphones, but they can't meet the basic requirements of shelter and make it work. Why are we members of a society that's extractive, that wants to set the collective against one another? And we think that's normal. In fact, we herald it. We want to one-up everybody. We want to have the biggest house, the biggest car, the most money, private jets, whatever, right? But the shame is that we live in a society where a society can't even meet the basics of every citizen. The basics. We'll educate and teach a homeless kid to read and write and allow him to live and his family to live in a car, an old beat up van or old beat up mobile home or in a tent on a sidewalk. And we'll take that kid, dust them off and put them in class, but we won't put their family in a dwelling. And knowing that there's more than enough money to do it. We spend more money a year on the military to keep this empire floating than we do on the basics of just housing people, putting clothes on their back. Simple clothes on their back. Doesn't have to be fancy, simple clothes on their back. And we don't look at that as a national shame. We look at them as a failure. Man, you can't get off the street, man. You got to collect bottles. Man, you got to sleep on a park bench. Instead of looking at it as a collective failure. And I wonder, all these fancy ideas and concepts and strategies and philosophies that we ponder back and forth, and we're looking at Congress, throwing things back and forth like it's something to do, right? Like it's supposed to be all this powerful stuff. And come January, you're going to throw millions of people out onto the street, along with their items. All the things that they've consumed and they thought were important are going to be dumped out on the street and left for scavengers. And we think that's okay as a collective. And we wonder why this experiment we call America is going to go down the tubes. Why it doesn't work, why it's not built to last. And it's because as fancy as these ideas that we call democracy and capitalism and conservatism and family-oriented, which we're not family-oriented. Let's kill that shit. This society is nihilistic, selfish, egotistical, narcissistical, and psychopathic. And all those fancy ideas, bombs, airplanes, iPhones, all that kind of stuff that we have, the modern convenience that we have that makes us look so glitzy and glamorous until we see that we can't even do the basics, which is basically put a roof over everyone's head, clothes on everyone's back, and food in everyone's stomach. Minimum. The basic minimum. They always taught me in sports, unless you can do the fundamentals, unless you can do the basics well, you're not going to be a success. You're not going to last. You're going to get exposed. And America's been exposed. In fact, citizens are finally waking up. Like they've been dumping billions elsewhere and billions and trillions into the stock market and doing all kinds of weird stuff with your credit card, with your money. And nobody says anything until you have a crisis. Now people are waking up. Maybe too late, but now they're waking up. Now they're questioning. But now that they're questioning, what are they asking for? Are they asking the right questions? Now they're finally figuring out that a government is supposed to take care of its members. A society is supposed to take care of its members. All of a sudden, we're not individuals anymore. We're collectives. Maybe, just maybe, this dose of reality is making us think less about fancy concepts, ideas, and philosophies and get back down to the basics of what it means to be a member of a collective, what it means to be a citizen of a country, to be a citizen of the United States, and what this government that leads us is supposed to do. Maybe this epoch of new time that we experiencing, because you think on the 25th of December is the rebirth of the sun, a new day. If you think of the Great Conjunction, which is the two old men combining together, the two hands of the clock coming together, striking midnight, which is the death of the old day and the beginning of the new. And maybe I'll talk about that one day. And the new hands starting to move away from each other, marking new time, marking a new epoch, marking a new era of the next 800 years or so. Maybe, just maybe, all this selfishness and degradation will end and we'll get a new era, a new reset, a great reset, as they call it. A great reset doesn't have to be negative. Maybe it'll be a reset till we can actually start all over again and do this thing right. Possibly. But anyway, my ramble's probably gone on long enough, and since this is Christmas, probably nobody will listen to this, at least not on Christmas. But I'm going to put the mic down now and maybe go out and enjoy the new epoch, maybe the reset of time, the reset of the era. And I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.